Change can be scary. Things like moving, starting a new job, or going to a new school place us in situations that we don't yet know how to navigate. It's the same with change that occurs on a broad scale. Shifts in political leadership, new technologies, disease outbreaks. These things upset the way we're used to living our lives, and that's no small thing. It's no new thing either. The end of the 18th century was a time of revolution. The air seemed heavy with pressure to find better ways of life and to forge individual destinies. The US jumped on this bandwagon, of course, but so did many of the country's indigenous residents and neighbors. Indigenous, Latinx, and Caribbean revolutionaries like Toussaint Louverture and Tecumseh profoundly altered the meaning of liberty in the Americas. Within a landscape of uncertainty, the United States dealt with some profound questions. Tensions were high as the US set out to figure out who they were now, who they wanted to become, and how they wanted to relate to the rest of the world. I'm Dr. Danielle Bainbridge, and this is Study Hall, U.S. History to 1865. Let's talk a bit about the immediate effects of the United States Revolution. Much of the unity between the colonies that arose during the Revolutionary War was centered on the war effort. Plus, as we know, the colonies weren't that united at the time. Now that the war had ended, there was real concern over whether the new nation would stay unified, or if the former colonies would further split apart. The states were diverse places. They had to navigate all that goes into creating the political and cultural foundations on which the new nation would stand in the coming years. On top of that, the US had to deal with entering the world stage, engaging with nations both indigenous and European on several fronts. The time had come for more politics, and though the revolutionary leaders did not want political parties to develop, two main groups emerged all the same. George Washington had a particularly clear-cut opinion on this, which he wrote in his 1796 farewell address. He believed that the formation of political parties was destined to distract the public from more important matters and spark animosity of one part of the nation against another. Other founding fathers saw parties as factions that would pursue a limited interest rather than work for the betterment of all the people of the new country. Though remember that the definition of people some of these founders had in mind left a good deal of folks out. Despite the warnings, two main parties emerged during the first years of the US's existence. These parties were different than the two that dominate American politics today, but they do use some confusingly similar terminology. This gets a bit messy, so let's break it down. Historians have named these groups the Federalists and the Democratic Republican Party. Both of these parties formed in the mid-1790s during George Washington's first administration, while Great Britain was already at war, again with revolutionary France. The Federalist Party took their name from the supporters of the ratification of the Constitution, and were mainly in support of stronger national government. They later saw Britain as an important ally and were concerned with fiscal policy. Under Federalist influence, the US saw the creation of the First National Bank of the United States, established by, you guessed it, Alexander Hamilton. This issue of establishing a national bank was huge. Hamilton saw this as an opportunity to both build the manufacturing power of the United States and allow the country to engage with European nations as an equal. The Federalists had a pretty elitist take on democracy. They favored indirect elections and representative democracy. And though President Washington clearly disdained political factions, his policies generally aligned with the Federalist Party. In contrast, the Democratic Republican Party formed in direct opposition to the Federalists. They valued states' rights and more decentralized power structures. They were also less willing than Federalists to reknit ties with Great Britain. Their leaders even included big names like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The Democratic Republicans supported France in the ongoing war, which many thought was the successor to the American Revolution. In the end, though, many of them turned against the ideals of the French Revolution, finding them too radical. And although the party's first three presidents were all wealthy, aristocratic Southern planters, there was an effort to make the party appear less hierarchical and elitist than the Federalists. Jefferson, for instance, decided to walk to the Capitol for his inauguration rather than ride in a fancy pants coach. To be clear, though, neither of these parties were in favor of actual universal suffrage. Many people who lived in and around the United States were barred from participating in political life. Keep in mind that the idea of a democracy was already a controversial concept. And the main fear was that the general population would lack the capability to participate in political decision making. Much of this centered around pseudoscientific conjecture about race and biological sex and plain old bigotry. These political parties weren't nearly as fully formed as modern ones. There were no primaries, for example, and some leaders still didn't want to recognize that political parties were a permanent part of American politics. But parties were taking root nonetheless, and some people began to feel affinity with one group or another because of the newspapers they read or even the political events they attended. The politics of the time were spicy. No one could agree on what exactly the country should do next. How would the new nation defend its borders? Would settlers seek to claim more territory? What is now the American Midwest and West was controlled by powerful indigenous nations and nation groups, as well as European presences that threatened the infant US. And the question of slavery, always of central importance, grew in importance in political and diplomatic affairs. In 1791, the enslaved people of Saint Domingue, a French sugar colony on an island then called Hispaniola in the Caribbean, began a slave rebellion. Led by formerly enslaved military general Toussaint Louverture, the freedom fighters won their independence in 1804 after long years of desperate battles against Britain, Spain, and France. They named their new nation Haiti, after the word Haiti, the indigenous name for the island. Black people who lived either free or enslaved saw the Haitian Revolution as a promise and proof that it was possible to overthrow the regime that denied their personhood and liberty. Black papers ran celebratory articles about the revolution, and the anniversary of their victory became a holiday of sorts within the enslaved communities. Meanwhile, the predominant white power structure saw the Haitian Revolution as a threat to the established social order. Some people more than others. In the following years, as more nations gained independence from Spain and indigenous nations kicked off their own rebellions, these questions of where the US should stand or whether they should offer aid to their neighbors sparked tense political discussion. And the issue of where slavery stood in all this only grew. At the same time, indigenous nations continued to experience their own profound changes. At the forefront of this change was the future of westward expansion. Now, with the British crown out of the way, settlers started to push further and further west. Indigenous leaders in the Americas had struggled against expansion and the extraordinary death and destruction it caused for centuries. Now, new figures and movements emerged in North America. At the top of a long list of outstanding indigenous revolutionaries are Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, who were believed to be brothers from a Shawnee village in what is now western Ohio. Up to this point, there wasn't a unified sense of Native American. People were Ojibwe or Shawnee or Potawatomi. At times, groups would choose to unite and form confederacies, but even then these were distinct groups with their own cultures and languages. But those differences weren't reflected in how they were treated by white settlers, and over time indigenous peoples had developed a sense of shared interests and the need to defend them collaboratively. Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa deepened and expanded this throughout the Ohio River Valley and pushed for one unifying identity, fostering a pan-indigenous cultural, diplomatic, and military effort. For instance, Tenskwatawa traveled to several Shawnee villages, prophesizing a return to cultural roots and trying to turn his people away from assimilation into, or destruction at the hands of, settlers' cultures. He and Tecumseh also created Prophetstown, designed to be the center of their confederation. Tecumseh set his sights wider than the Ohio River Valley, and over many years, he helped to build a far-reaching pan-indigenous movement of tribes who refused to sell any further land to the US and who rallied around shared cultural identity and spirituality while still respecting and maintaining the differences in religion and language that each tribe held. As negotiation with the American government began to seem like a dead end, Tecumseh turned to the British as an ally. He fought with the British and died in the process during the War of 1812. This network posed a barrier to further land speculation and helped to stave off Western expansion for years before Tecumseh was killed in the fall of 1813. Other indigenous leaders would pursue the cause of indigenous rights and cultural power, and create new forms of alliance and collaboration in the years and centuries to come. So yes, change is always a difficult process. What's important to see is how different nations and people who lived within and around the country that is now called the United States reacted to this change. The arguments, revolutions, and changing identities happening within and around the early United States would build the foundation for parts of the new nation. But even today, much of the identity of the US continues to change as we question and re-question who we are and who we want to be. As we touch on throughout this course, history is not inevitable, and we continue making it every day. Thanks for watching Study Hall US History to 1865, which is part of the Study Hall Project, a partnership between ASU and Crash Course. If you like this video and want to keep learning with us, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about Study Hall and the videos produced by Crash Course and ASU in the links in the description. See you next time.